Greetings, friends, and welcome to this episode of the Dharma Junkie podcast. I've been putting out a lot of content lately, but it's mostly been the Dharma talks that I've been giving at Gulf Coast Dharma here in Pensacola. I had dialed back on the amount of interviews that I was doing for a while because I had gotten a little more particular about the guests that I want to have on the show. And so I've been working to get guests that I think will be aligned with both myself and with my vision for this podcast. So with that being said, my guest on this episode is writer, martial artist, educator, lover, host of the Drunken Taoist and History on Fire podcasts, and all-around wonderful human, Daniele Bolelli. And if you haven't checked out History on Fire yet, by the end of this episode, I'm sure you'll want to. So we talk about the Tao, we talk about Zen, we talk about Zen rascal, Ikkyo Sojin. We talk a little bit about the void of connection in Western culture and dealing with failure in our pursuits, and oh, so much more. I had an absolutely wonderful time making this episode, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. So with that being said, I won't ramble on. Without further ado, Daniele Bolelli.
You might catch yourself sliding in and out of a hallucinatory state. Just relax and enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
This is an experiment in mind formation. Information. Forming, controlling, operating your mind and your brain. We're using digital techniques to overload, scramble, confuse, unfocus your mind. The natural state of the brain is chaos. Chaos is beautiful.
Daniele Bolelli, it's amazing to have you on Dharma Junkie. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So you've written really extensively on Zen and the Tao. And
Sure.
That's really one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you. I mean, aside from all of the other reasons that I wanted to talk to you, but mostly it was because of your writing on Zen Buddhism. And I just wonder, how did you get involved with Zen in the first place?
I wish I remembered. As a kid, I remember reading when I was really young. I was probably about, I think I was 11 when somebody gave me to read Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, which was this collection of very short Zen stories. They are like a couple of pages each at the most. There's 101 of them. And, when you read it at 11, 95% of it is going to go right over your head. But there's going to be some stuff that you go like, wow, that was beautiful. I really dug that one. So that was enough to stir some interest in me of I want to know more about this. I want to run into it more. I want to see what's... And then lately I was rereading a lot of the stuff that my father would write. And even though he explicitly referred to Taoism or Zen, not that much, he did occasionally, but not that much. His thinking was just heavily steeped in it. There's so much Taoism in the way he wrote and thought and explained things. Even though he, in many cases, I think some of it was because he read Taoist texts, but some of it, I think, because he was just how he was. That was his personality, and he showed up in that fashion. So I think it came. That's why, to me, when I ran into things on starting to study, it came quick to me because it was part of sort of the way I was raised.
That makes sense. So when did you formally get involved with it?
I started, because I never had, mine has been purely a personal self-discovery, read books, think about life kind of thing. Hasn't been, go to the temple and meditate X hour a day kind of thing. Not that I have anything against it. I think that's awesome,
Right.
but that just not has been my path.
Right.
And so it's been a bit more on the philosophical side than practice per se.
Gotcha. So if we're talking about Taoist philosophy, what do you think are some of the misconceptions that people have about the Tao?
Well, for one, I think Taoists were not looking to make friends with lots of people. So much of the writings has this vibe that is like, if you get it, great, and if you don't, who cares? We are not gonna move one finger to explain it in any other way to you. And if anything, most philosophy, most religions, most anything tends to want to attract people. Taoism is to make a point of absolutely not wanting to attract people. The attitude is very much like, if you don't get it, go read some Confucianism. It's simple. They'll keep it basic for you. They'll prevent you from screwing things up too bad. Good enough for you. You don't want to play with these ideas. They're So there's a bit of an elitist thing in Taoist writings that make it, depending on which translation of the Tao Te Ching you pick up, it may be pretty tough. Sometime, I remember the first time I read the Tao Te Ching, I thought it made no sense. I was like, what the hell is this? This is, I would find and it was a particularly awful translation. I was probably in a period of my life where I wasn't quite as ready for it, partially the translation. So then running it into other people who can start breaking it down a little more, and then you run into a better translation, and then it starts clicking more. But I guess when you talk about misconceptions, one of the things regarding the duality of Taoism, the yin-yang concept of it all, is that because in the West, duality has a bit of a judgmental vibe to it. There's God and the devil. There's heaven and hell. There's absolute good and absolute evil. Duality is always conceived of almost as a battle, as a fight between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And so the way even some people spin Taoism, they think that it's about, you need good and evil together because otherwise you cannot have one without the other. I don't think that's the point at all. So much of Taoism, the duality is not categorizing those terms. It's more about opposite energies who are not necessarily at odds with each other. They are just the same way as you would say men and women. They are not against each other. There's nothing inherent in them that they are at each other's throat. They're just different energies.
Right.
And part of life is the mixing of these opposite energies. Night and day, light and darkness, that kind of thing. Very different from thinking of it as good and evil.
Right. I feel that. Yeah, I feel like they both exist, but they're not. Yeah, like you said, they're not exactly against each other, right? Yeah.
They are both needed. They're both important. They are both good in their own way, and they're both bad if out of balance. So it's not about the intrinsic quality of one thing or another. It's about the dance between these two opposites, and how there's a place where the dance is healthy and it leads to good results because there's a certain dynamic balance to it.
Right.
And then there's a place where the balance is off, and it will lead to bad outcomes.
Yeah, for sure. So how we got kind of started talking was around the subject of failure, and I was just curious, like, how do you deal with failure in your pursuits? You're a scholar, you're a teacher, you're
Sure.
a martial artist, you're a podcaster. How has been some of the ways that you have dealt with failure, and how have you used your spiritual side or your spiritual practice to deal with some of these failures along your journey?
Yeah, failure is a rough one because none of us enjoys the process of failing. And the reality of it, that because of the way life is designed, is that you're going to fail a lot more than you're going to succeed.
Yeah.
Some of it is through our own effort, some of it is through luck, some of it is a mix of the two. And so in some way you need to start becoming comfortable with failure, which is a very difficult pill to swallow. It's way easier said than done. Because when you put your heart and soul into something and it goes nowhere, very hard to see it as it's just part of the journey. It's an opportunity. It's like, no, it's not. It sucks. This is awful.
Yeah, for sure.
So on the other hand, like it or not, whether it is an opportunity in a greater sense or not, those are the cards you're given.
Yeah.
Deal with it. It's like, I wish it was different. Yes, but this is the way things are. So how do you deal? with the reality? How do you deal with the fact that most of your dreams are not going to pan out? Most of your plans are not going to work. Most of your projects are not going to go through. I know, I won't mention names, but I know a director who directed a movie that for probably a good 6 months span, probably for the whole, it was probably the most successful movie in the world during that particular year.
Mm.
And they drink pretty much morning through night because despite the fact that they've achieved this incredible success, the reality is that the 100 projects before that and the 100 projects after that have gone nowhere.
Right.
So they are batting a rate of 0.1% of what their visions are and what they get to produce. Now, the one time it hit big.
Right. Yeah.
But it doesn't deny the fact that the other 200, they keep running into one wall after another, and they clearly did not exactly match. Somebody could say, you made a ton of money, you've had fantastic success, you're done. How good is that? But that's not how the mind works.
Right. Yeah, for sure. It's like, nah, I don't feel like I've succeeded at all. That was just a
No.
drop in the bucket of everything I've tried to do. Yeah.
And that is somebody where the level of success that 99.99% of human beings can't even dream of.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So if somebody like that can run into the same dynamics, that means pretty much everybody does.
Yeah. I guess some people just get luckier than others, huh? Yeah.
They do. They do.
It seems that way.
It definitely happens. And even luck to a point, because eventually, there are certain realities that apply to everybody, right? Eventually, everybody grows old, everybody gets sick, everybody die. You're going to experience tragedy. You're going to experience heartbreak. You're going to have people you love that, all that stuff happen to everybody if you live longer. Yeah. But clearly the percentage changes the equation quite a bit. If somebody's happening 10% of their life and somebody's 80% of their life, it's a big difference there.
Yeah. The ratio difference is quite astounding.
Yeah,
for sure.
So that's where the role of luck plays in.
Yeah. So as far as like podcasting, man, you do the Drunken Taoist still, and you're still doing History on Fire. You started the Drunken Taoist in what, 2012?
Yeah.
What was the impetus behind starting that podcast? Like what seemed like a good idea?
Yeah, it was weird. It was back in 2011. I knew absolutely nothing about podcasting, and my life was pretty much going down the drain. Like everything that could go wrong was going wrong. And at the end of 2011, toward in the middle of all this drama, like serious drama, lots of bad things going down, I end up as a guest on the Joe Rogan podcast, which I think was my very first podcasting experience, where I didn't even know what podcasting was.
Right.
And speaking of the role of luck, right? It's like from one day to another for no good I've written a book, but so what? That shouldn't really... For some reason, I have no idea, it attracted his attention at the right time, at the right situation. So I find myself on, even back then, was the biggest podcast on earth, let alone today.
Right. Yeah.
And so then I spent the next 3 days answering people's emails, sending me messages and stuff. And I'm like, whoa, this is a big medium that I didn't even know existed. And so because of that, I ended up being, a bunch of places they would call me to be a guest on their podcast. And in time, I had quite a few people who were saying, oh, you should do your own podcast. And I was desperately trying to avoid it because I was like, my plate is already pretty damn full as it is. I don't really want to start another thing.
Right.
But after a while, I was like, you know what? Might as well. Why not? Let's give it a shot. And so I started Drunken Taoist in 2012. 2015, I started History on Fire. That's more because Drunken Taoist is a chatty, talk about anything kind of podcast.
Right.
History on Fire is a more of a clear mission, so to speak. It's about telling some epic tales in history. No guests, no nothing, just me telling stories, essentially. And that one grew a lot bigger than Drunken Taoist. And so I've been playing with podcasting ever since. I still am I'd age with both, even though, again, still History on Fire does considerably better than Drunken Taoist. And I think eventually I grew to see it as just another way of storytelling. It's like I love writing, but the publishing world is rough, to say the least. It's very hard to go anywhere with writing. Never mind that even if you do go anywhere, like by the time you have a vision or an idea or something, even a finished product that you are really happy with, by the time it goes through the seven stomachs of agents, publishers, this, that, the other, marketing department, that's if you're lucky enough to get through the whole process. What they poop out from the other end has very little resemblance to whatever idea you originally had or what you wanted to do.
Yeah, that sucks.
So the choices you usually get as an author, unless again you strike, unless you win the lottery of luck, you either self-publish or publish with a really small company where it's gonna sell very little, but you get to do things how you want them, or you quote unquote get lucky to be digested by all that industry, and they end up creating a product that has some vague relation to what you originally conceived.
Yeah.
So, writing, it's rough. I love it. It's my favorite medium, but it's a rough one.
Yeah.
Podcasting gave me more freedom, gave me more, like, I create something and it's out the next day. I don't have this lag time of sometimes years from sometime you create something and by the time it's out, you're like, I don't even remember that thing.
Yeah, there's a huge difference there, right?
Yeah.
Podcasting is, it's just record it and send it out. There's not much thought that really can even go into it after that point. I guess you could second guess the topic or something like that, but once it's out in the ether, it's out in the ether. Whereas, it sounds like publishing is just like an absolute kind of a fucking nightmare, honestly.
And to be honest, like every time I had to interact with agents or publishers or thing, the feeling every time is like, why don't you guys just write your own book at this point? Whatever idea you come up with, they want to change it so much that it's like, well, the only reason why we're doing it is because maybe you like the audience I have in podcasting, and so you want to put my name there, but you clearly have a different idea completely. Just try. I mean, and some people pretty much told me flat out like that. He's like, yeah, I mean, you just need to put your name on it, but we'll get somebody else to write the silly book for you, and you don't. I'm like, who do you think I am, Kim Kardashian? Like, I'm a writer. I like writing. I do it because I want to, not because.
Right.
It's a strange gig. That's why podcasting, at least you have full freedom, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's your vision, and you can kind of put your heart and your soul into it without anybody coming and fucking it up, right?
Yep, precisely.
Yeah. So speaking of that, like just that topic of other people not fucking it up, like as far as History on Fire, how do you come to the particular topics that you choose?
So, I mean, I read a lot of history in life, both starting as a kid, some formally through studying, some not. Eventually, I did a master in history. So I've read enough that I've run into so many great stories that I jot them down. I'm like, oh, that's a good story. And then I still run into things, reading magazines or talking to people, or somebody will tell me another one. And I'm like, oh, I don't know that one. Let me dive down the rabbit hole and see what the story is like. And usually there are a few requirements that I'm looking for. The story needs to have a larger than life epic quality to it. Ideally, there's some strong character involved, because it's very hard to tell a good story without good characters. Sometimes you can, but not as easy.
Right.
There have to be enough sources to make it that we actually know this. Because sometimes I hear a fantastic story, I read it, it's awesome, I dive any deeper, and what we know can be told in 5 minutes.
Right.
And then there's nothing beyond that anybody knows about it. And so I'm like, that's a fantastic tale, but I can build an episode on that,
Right,
So as long as there's enough material about it out there in the sources, it's a larger than life story, has great characters, then we're in business, then it's, and my to-do list on those is long enough that I don't think I'll ever run out of material. There's so much, so many great stories that I'm like, this. Yeah, I'm not gonna run out, that's for sure.
Well, that's cool. So, what do you think your favorite one that you've done so far is? What was your favorite topic to cover?
Hard to tell because there are so many that I enjoy for different reasons. One that I've done that's related to Zen stuff, actually. I've done one that was a two-part series, so just two episodes about the life of Ikkyu, who was this Zen monk from born in the late 1300s, lived through most of the 1400s.
Right. Yeah. He was
And
quite the character.
Ikkyu's just funny. He's so damn funny. He's such a wild guy. It's like, yeah, if I have to pick a favorite historical figure out of anybody in history, that's probably Ikkyu. He's
Yeah.
just so. Also, because history is often depressing, there's so much heavy stuff going on and terrible things. Ikkyu is a guy who just enjoyed his life, was a fantastic human being, was funny, created beautiful things. He's like, doesn't really get much better than him.
Right. Yeah. So, for people who don't know what we're talking about, you want to give them a little information on Ikkyo Sojin?
Sure, Ikkyu was the legitimate son of the Emperor of Japan. He was born in the, I think, last decade of the 1300s. His mom put him in a Zen monastery when he was a kid, so he grew up without a father, without really a mother, in the fairly severe environment of a Zen monastery. And Ikkyu clearly had a brilliant talent for Zen, but precisely because he had a brilliant talent for Zen, he regularly clashed with the Zen establishment because Ikkyu felt that Zen had lost whatever original spirit it had, and it turned into a bureaucracy. He felt that the temples were primarily concerned with gathering donations and courting rich patrons rather than actually doing Zen. So he, for example, there's a tale about him where his teacher gives him a certificate of enlightenment. When you are, because within the Zen tradition, you're supposed to have a teacher recognize you as an enlightened master.
Right. Transmission. Yeah.
And Ikkyu was like, certificate of enlightenment, get the fuck out of here. And he just burns it. And he's like, which is insane because it's the equivalent of somebody who has gone through all the years of schooling and gets a PhD and then burns the PhD, and
Right.
it's like, you don't do that, and it's like, and that kind of captured his vibe. His main passions were in no particular order: Zen, women, and drinking. And in the process of this giant party that was his life, he had a huge impact on Japanese cultural history. Some of his students were people who then developed for their tea ceremony, theater, calligraphy, painting, you name it, just about every other art form. And Ikkyu had a tremendous impact on it, even though his main priorities were enjoying life,
Right.
Yeah,
that's what always fascinated me about him. It was just like, man, I'm just here to have a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. It's really hard the way I discovered him originally was a huge fan of the novelist Tom Robbins.
Okay.
Still Life with Woodpecker, Another Roadside Attraction, even Cowgirls Got the Blues, some of those books and he mentioned at one point how his idol was Ikkyu. And I'm like, wait, I'm into Zen. I love Tom Robbins. I never heard of Ikkyu. What's going on? So I started looking into Ikkyu's life, whatever I could find in English, and I was like, oh my God, I see the light. This guy is so good that he seemed made up. It's so fun.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a super fun story. That was a really, really good episode. And I definitely recommend anyone listening to go check that out. But
Yeah, I believe that's History on Fire. I want to say 45 or 46. Those are the episodes, I'm pretty sure.
So, in addition to your work as a podcaster and an author, you're also a really accomplished martial artist. So when did you get it started with martial arts?
I started training when I was 17.
Okay.
I was still living in Italy at the time. First 4 years or so, I kind of screwed around with it. By the time I turned 21, almost on the day off, I got much more serious into it. And then it became a more important part of my life. I'm 49 now, so I've been at it for a while. And to be honest, I enjoy all of it. Like, I don't think there's a style of martial art that I don't enjoy. It's like I've trained in a lot of things I enjoy. I just find it as a great path for self-expression.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that what you enjoy about it so much? Is just the way that you can express yourself through the art itself?
I think one aspect that intrigues me is what you were asking at the beginning regarding failure. Because the reason why most people get into martial arts is that there's a sense of empowerment that everybody craves. This sense that you're gonna become this badass person who can handle all sort of situation, and then the reality of it is that a lot of the time you spend getting crushed, because the reality is that it doesn't even matter how good you get. There's always somebody better than you.
Right.
Always going to. So there's something interesting about that process because your ego gets squashed quickly. You run into, if you have an ego about it, you get beaten up enough times that it's annoying, the whole. So there's something to be said for that ability to remain cool in a situation in which you're losing. There's no way you're going to win. This person is better than you in every conceivable way.
Right.
And yet you can't just say, okay, we're done, I'm out because this doesn't feel good. You're in there. And so to push through that process of deciding to stay in something that's uncomfortable, both physically and to your ego. And you decide that you're going to fight on in a completely hopeless situation, in the sense that the outcome you want, you're not going to get it. There's just no chance in hell. And yet you decide to fight on. It does strange things to your brain, which definitely I find that there's more of a relation between that experience and the rest of life than there is between the empowering dream. Nobody's gonna. How often are you gonna pull off the perfect martial art technique in real life? It's like probably never. Why? But how often are you gonna run in life in situations that are objectively hopeless? And yet you still have to be there and take care of business and do whatever the best you can do in certain situations.
Yeah.
So I find that ability to stay focused in extremely uncomfortable situation a very valuable one.
Right. Yeah, just the resilience building aspect of it for sure.
Yeah.
I took taekwondo when I was a kid. I was probably like ages 10 to maybe I think 13.
Yep.
And I was a rather large 10-year-old, so I got put into the adult classes. And so that was my whole experience with martial arts at that time, was just getting the shit kicked out of me.
Of course. Yeah.
It's like, no, I enjoy this though, and I want to stick with it. Yeah. So that resonates with me a lot, because it's like, that was totally my experience. It was like, there's no way I'm going to win this, but I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep at it. Yeah. I actually ended up getting a black belt in Taekwondo, and then I got sick when I was 13. I was diagnosed with childhood cancer, basically, and so that kind of put an end to that at that time, and I just kind of never picked it back up. But as I've gotten older, it's like I kind of want to get back into some sort of martial arts, and I'm been leaning more towards jujitsu, because there's jujitsu dojos everywhere now, and they're much easier to find than a lot of other different styles. So it's like, yeah, I'll probably do that. When it arises.
Jiu-jitsu also has a pretty good quality of being there are no strikes, so whatever damage you take is to the limbs, not to the brain. That pretty important thing. Two, the fact that you mostly fight on the ground. You're avoiding all the, like, for example, so much judo involves throwing. And most people who don't pick it up as kids, it's not a fun process to get, like, even if you know how to fall, getting thrown over and over and over, the potential for injuries start going higher.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that in jiu-jitsu you're eliminating that because it's essentially all ground fighting, makes it a little easier for many people to handle.
Yeah. How long have you been doing jiu-jitsu?
Jiu-jitsu, give or take, maybe a little over 20 years.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's I've gone and rolled a couple times, like just a couple times, just to check it out. Because like I said, I haven't really done martial arts in several years. I'm 41, so almost 20 years now. 18, I guess. But so I've gone and rolled a couple times just to check it out. I really enjoyed it. But yeah, it's a very humbling,
Oh
very,
yeah.
very humbling practice. It's like, yeah, go get your face shoved into a mat a few times.
I mean, especially jiu-jitsu, because the ground game is like anybody, even somebody who doesn't know what they are doing. If they throw a giant haymaker and they hit you, they can still knock you out. Nobody knows what they are doing on the ground unless they know what they are doing. You don't tap into like all the natural, there are no good natural instincts that kick in that allow you to do a great technique. So it's very initially it's like a baby learning to walk, like everything you do is wrong. And it's fine, you're not supposed to know anything, but literally everything you do is wrong. And so it's takes a while to even start getting the vocabulary of what's happening and how to move and keep balance and all of that. One thing that sometimes I think about jiu-jitsu is that the majority of people have, especially in US, there's not a whole lot of physical contact between people. Unless it's physical contact, more often than not makes people think of sex because that's pretty much the only time they have serious physical contact. Otherwise, it's not a huggy, touchy kind of culture. So most people lack that severely. And so I think jiu-jitsu gives them a good excuse to roll around with people and have physical contact with other human beings in a non-sexual way that feels good, that human beings need, but our cultural norms don't really push toward. So it's a very, no, I'm fighting. Yeah, you're in a pajama cuddling with some other guy. Come on, let's real.
I think we have moved even further away from the physical touch aspect of society after COVID. It's like,
Yeah, of course.
I know people who are like, no, I don't hug people anymore, and it's like, well, okay, man. I guess
Yeah,
do
yeah.
you do you, but like we need that. We need that physical interaction. We're a social species. It's part of our DNA.
Totally. I mean, I grew up in Italy, so it's all like super physical, right? It's all very, so yeah, US is different. Just like,
Yeah,
wow.
for sure.
This
Yeah,
and I think it contributes to the sense of loneliness that so many people experience.
yeah.
It's not the only factor, but it's a factor in it.
Yeah. How do you feel like social media plays into that sense of loneliness that people have? I feel like so many people just substitute that online interaction for any type of actual physical face-to-face interaction. Like even doing this podcast, like I love doing, podcasts, and I love doing them over Zoom, and it's great. But like ultimately, like I really like being able to sit across from a person, and you get these emotional cues, these physical cues that just you don't get over text or even over Zoom.
100%. I mean, it's a good. The problem is when it's a substitute, because if it's in addition to, then great. It allows you to interact with people that you're never going to meet in person. So that's a cool thing. That's great. The problem is when that virtual interaction become a substitute for the already dwindling number of in-person, face-to-face interactions that people have. Now you got a real problem because the online one doesn't really, it doesn't compare.
Yeah.
It's a nice extra, but in itself does not compare to what real human beings do when they interact.
Yeah, it's a nice addition, but a poor substitution.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the gig. And unfortunately, we live in a society where I think it very much goes hand in hand with individualism, even
Oh,
with the capitalist economy,
yeah, for
where the
sure.
whole idea is, people are ready to drop everything to chase a job across the country.
Right,
And so, what does that do to the relationships you have with people? Inevitably, all the relationships you have need to be disposable.
right.
Because if you're ready to pack up and go at a drop of a dime, that means you need to be ready to leave everything behind that you built emotionally with people and start over somewhere else. And so I don't know, I find US great to get stuff done, terrible for social purposes.
Right. Yeah.
In terms of social purposes, it feels awful.
Yeah, I mean that's the only experience I have is the U.S. So I kind of grew up with that. But
Yeah.
the more I've gotten involved with my own spiritual practice, and I facilitate a sitting group here we have a really tight sangha, and everybody hugs each other, and everybody's really, really close with each other. And, where we all have the experience in those rooms to be just open and vulnerable with each other. And I feel like, most people just don't have that. It's just a safe space where you can actually let your guard down and unguard your heart and be like, hey, this is what's on my mind. And get a hug, and then it's it's gonna be okay and all that shit. And people don't have that. It really is damaging.
I think I don't mean to oversimplify, but I really feel that the lack of community is probably the number one reason for the constantly climbing levels of depression and suicide and all the negative mental health statistics that you see all the time. I think they go hand in hand with lack of community.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100% for sure. Yeah, we don't have that kind of community in the US. People just aren't close the way they are in a lot of other cultures. And that they just gave a talk recently on happiness versus fulfillment. And it's like, well, happiness, that's like a big dopamine hit thing that comes from, some sort of like transactional experience. Like, I eat the tasty food, I have the sex, I watch the movie, it makes me happy for a little bit of time. I have the drink, I smoke the joint, I do whatever, and it makes me cool for a little while. But ultimately, fulfillment really comes from these like pro-tribal activities and being around others and helping others. Like, happiness comes by helping yourself, and fulfillment comes from helping others, right?
Yeah, and it's, growing up in Italy, for me, Italy wasn't friendly enough. I always felt I needed more. I wanted more of a sense of tribe, a sense of community, and I felt that I didn't have enough of what I wanted. And then I moved to US, and I was like, oh my God, Italy was paradise by comparison in those terms. But at the same time, I think that's also why I ended up living in US, is the fact that at the end of the day, while Italy was a lot better than US in that regard, it still wasn't hitting the minimum level that I wanted. So if I'm not going to get what I want anyway, at least in US, I saw way more chances to get stuff done, to make things happen, to create things in a way that I did not in Italy.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, in one place I can get things done, and it's a terribly lonely place. Another place is probably can't get much done, and it's a mildly lonely place. I'm like, not enough of a difference for that to become the factor that would make me go, why would I ever go to US? I should stay in Italy,
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So what do you do for community? Like, in Daniele Bolelli's life, what do you do? Like, how do you find community?
It's I don't consider, if I look at my life, I think I made it work well given the cards I was given, but it's very far from where in an ideal world I would build my life, because the reality is that I know a ton of people. I know a ton of people who consider me their friend that I get along with. But like, for my standards of friendship, I'm like, we're pleasant acquaintances. We like each other. I wish you good things. But let's be real. How much time do we ever spend with one another? How often do we talk? How often? And so to me, it's like, no, real community is something else. And it's something else that I just don't have. That I don't. So I have some, it's the American way, right? You have a couple of primary relationships that are everything, on which everything depends, which of course is way too much pressure on any relationship.
For sure.
So, I have a super strong relationship with my daughter. I have a super strong relationship with my girlfriend. I have a strong relationship with my mom. Other than that, when it comes to community at large, again, it's like, I love walking into a dojo and train jiu-jitsu with the same guys and give a hug and say what's up. But that's a very poor substitute for a real community.
Right. Yeah.
It's better than nothing. I mean, I'll take it, but
yeah, for sure. Right. Yeah. It's all just kind of surface level though.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and as you said, I think that's just the American way. It's like we have this like handful of people that we are actually like really close and intimate with. And then everybody else is just kind of off in the periphery. And it's like, yeah, hey, what's up? Yeah, you been all right? Cool. Yeah, don't give me a hug. All right. Well, it's good to see you. And then we just go about our business,
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's where I think it's no surprise when you see the statistics regarding the mental health crisis. It's like, we're not built to live this way, just plain and simple.
Right. Yeah. I've found that like most of the mental health diagnoses could probably be solved if like Maslow's hierarchy of needs was actually being fulfilled.
Right.
Like, it's like when you have people that are like almost technically under the pyramid who can't even get their basic security needs met. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, they're probably not going to achieve self-actualization anytime soon.
Of course. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. I very much agree.
Yeah. Well, so, what is it like? What does a typical day look like for you, man? Like, what do you like? What a project do you have going right now that you feel excited about? How about
Yeah,
that?
that's so many. So one cool thing that has happened post-COVID is that I mostly work from home. Like I go teach classes in person because I teach history in college. I go teach classes 1 day a week now, and then the rest of the time I get to work from home, which is fantastic. I like it. And it's between teaching and doing stuff for school, but then stuff for the podcast, both Drunken Taoist and History on Fire. It's either research or writing something out or recording or anything of that sort. I've been super excited by the fact that just 3 months ago or so, I finished writing a novel, which I've never done. I wrote books before, they were non-fiction. This is the first time that I write fiction, and I've had an absolute blast.
That's awesome.
Now I'm going through the other side of the arc of the wave because now I'm dealing with the whole agents and publishers and things, and it's making me like now in these last few days in particular, I've been feeling it a lot where if I run into somebody who tell me that they have some creative passion or even a creative talent, my first response is to go, I'm sorry, poor you. Because it's just sucks to deal with what it takes to create. Because of course, when you create something, you want it to go out there, you want it to be shared with more than just your mom or something, and that process is not fun. So
No, it's not.
that's kind of where I'm at, where I enjoy the creative high, but now that it's over and I have to deal with the reality of what it means to publish, and I'm just like,
Yeah,
I
no,
need to. One thing I need to do, and I haven't had time, but I need to make it happen soon, is I need to build a YouTube channel for History on Fire because I think that would be the way to also rely. Like History on Fire, because it had done well audience-wise, it ended up being bought by Luminary. That's kind of like a podcasting company where they put
right.
most of it behind the paywall, which of course kills your audience. It's they pay me well, which was sweet to get paid for something I enjoy doing, but of course it sort of killed my audience for a while. So part of the rebuilding means I should probably create a YouTube channel. Do my episodes are usually long deep dives, they're like 2 hour episodes, instead to do 10-minute video where I tell a crazy story in a little time, make it fun, boom, I'm out, put them out on YouTube and try to get a different audience that way that then I can bring to the podcast. So I think that's what I need to do next to revamp things.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. It sounds like a fun project to put together and one that you would have total control over.
Exactly. At least that one, as you say, total control. So that one has that advantage.
Right. Yeah. No, I feel that, man. I played a lot of in a lot of bands, and
Yep.
invariably it's like nobody wants to do the same thing at any given point. And it's like, what do we even fucking do it here? It's like, especially
Yeah.
when like you're the main songwriter, and so you come into it with this vision of these songs, and then people want to start changing shit. It's like, no, 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 no. So eventually, I just ended up playing by myself because it just was
Right.
easy. It was just easier. It's like I have too much. I have too many control issues to let go
Yeah.
of my creative vision.
In some cases, there are people who make it work, or they come in with an idea and it get changed, and the synergy of the band people it works, and they are all happy with it.
Right.
But that's magic right there. More often than not, you're gonna be like, "No, you dumbass! Why did you change that thing? That thing is what the thing that makes the song click. It's amazing. It's you don't." So yeah, I feel you. My
Yeah.
daughter is she's not even 40. She's still 13 now. She's a killer singer, and I'm slightly worried for what that whole process entails. because I'm like, I know she wants it. She's something that she loves, that she wants to keep doing, but I'm like, good luck.
Good luck. Yeah, I think I've only been in one band where everybody actually agreed on stuff, and that's because I think we came up with this rule. It was like, unless everybody agrees, we're not doing it.
Right.
It was like we all have to like land on the same page. We can't have one person that doesn't agree. It's
Yeah.
like everybody has to be a general consensus, and then then that thing can stay in the song. But other than
Right.
that, yeah, that's the only time it ever worked.
Yeah.
So you say your daughter's a musician. Yeah, I wish her nothing but luck. It's a fucking horrible industry.
Yep.
It's
Really is.
much like any other media publishing industry other than podcasting where you have total control.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a beast. I think Hunter S. Thompson had some good quotes on the music industry.
Oh, no, I mean, it's like all of those industries are, that's the problem. That so much of it is, I mean, today at least there's the option of independent stuff. The problem, of course, is that there are 3 zillion other people doing independent stuff. So what separates yours, what's going to get your notice is another big problem. You know, you have control and you can get whatever you want out when you want.
Yeah.
But is anybody going to know that it's out there? Is anybody going to?
That's the problem
Whereas,
with podcasting, right?
yeah, the traditional industry model is you have to please all these gatekeepers. And the problem with the gatekeepers is that more often than not, it's not just that they are not artistic people. Nobody's asking them to be the artistic people. You know, if they understood art, they would be doing art. They wouldn't be running the empire.
Right.
But you ask them at least to be good at their job, which is to understand what's going to sell and what's not, what's going to work and what's not. And most of the time, they have no idea. You know, most of the time they are afraid of losing money, and that's why every other artistic story is the same. You know, Harry Potter getting rejected by 40 zillion publishers, the person who listened to the first Beatles album and say this trash is never gonna go anywhere, and you know, all that stuff. It's how it goes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the podcast industry in particular is difficult to gain traction in,
Yeah.
especially, starting late in the game. Like I think, if you were like in the first wave of podcasters in the early, 2000, I'd say 2008, 9, 10,
Sure.
in that area, like you're kind of golden in a sense because you're grandfathered in as such. But if you were to start, like I started this podcast in like 2020, and
Yeah.
and man, I mean, I get a decent amount of listeners, but it's so hard to gain any kind of traction with anything.
It's hard. It's very hard. And even, yeah, honestly, I haven't noticed too many things that give me a bump in listenership, except the only time ever when I saw serious dramatic change were Rogan podcasts.
Right.
Back in the day, he would have me a lot because he was a podcast that was more about other things. Now it's either angry culture wars or celebrities, and I don't fit either, so I'm not there anymore.
Right.
But like that's when back in the day, I remember, seeing my audience double overnight.
Yeah. It's definitely been interesting watching that podcast evolve over the years. I guess I started listening to Rogan, like I think probably when maybe around the first time you were on the show, like way back in the day, and just so I've been listening to Rogan for and just watching it evolve over the years. It's like, well, this is taking an interesting turn.
Really disappointing. And I say disappointing in the sense that if you look at, I try to explain what I mean by disappointing. Because of me ending up on Rogan podcast early on and ending up many times again after that, a ton of my social media was flooded with people who were Rogan listeners. And most of the people who come on in 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, you would see my social media stream was all people who were into many different things. They had lots of curiosity. They were cool human beings who had passion for many different aspects of life. There was a zest there of something interesting moving.
Right.
And then I saw many, like an insanely high percentage of the same people, fast forward to post 2015, being just angry all the time. All their whole social media now was not more, oh, look at all these cool things I'm into that I'm discovering about life. They were all about just nothing but anger. Just screaming at the void their life. And I was just like, whoa, what went wrong? Something there. And some of it, I think, is culture in general and maybe has nothing to do with the podcast. But even the direction where Joe went, where he went from being sort of a stoner podcast about all sort of fun topics to becoming controversial, angry stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Life's too short to be angry, man.
Yeah, I mean, it works for him. He's got the biggest podcast in the world and he has more listeners than anybody does. But I don't know that that was a good trade,
Right.
because ultimately he was successful even before.
Oh, yeah.
So I think he's just, that's how things. It's one of those where I don't know if he was a catalyst for certain things changing in like what I see in all these other people who are on my social media, or is the other way around, that the world around changed in a less than pleasant way, and that also affected the podcast.
I mean, it's probably a little of both, right? It's probably both and.
Yeah, I'm afraid that that's a very good Taoist answer right there.
Yeah.
And it usually often is, right? It's never a one-way explanation. It usually is more complicated than.
Yeah. Nothing's ever really black and white, right? There's always shades of gray.
Yeah.
Well, you're still you do Duncan's podcast like all the time. I see you're on there like every other month or something.
Yeah, I've done Duncan's podcast like 20 plus times.
Yeah, I know, right? He's a fun guy. He's a fun guy.
Duncan is hilarious. But, Duncan in that sense never changed. He's like he was a crazy psychedelic monkey back in the day, and he's still a crazy, it's a different gig.
Yeah.
It's definitely a different gig. Yeah, Duncan is hilarious. There's always a podcast. Every time I podcast with him, there's a moment in the podcast where I see his eyes widen and he start going down this crazy imagery that's popping into his brain that is downloaded from some different plane of consciousness, and I just start laughing my ass off because he's so it's pretty fun.
Do you have any history with psychedelics?
Mostly not that great. I've had your pleasant experience with mushroom or something, nothing earth-shattering. But then I had like some really bad ones where, I had one that was really atrocious where I did it in the context of like MAPS recommended psychedelic therapy to deal with PTSD and heavy stuff. And man, not only I didn't solve my PTSD, but I added another layer on top of it by the time he was rough, to say the least. And I didn't expect a walk in the park. I expected, of course, I'm going in to deal with some heavy stuff, so I expect that it's not going to be easy. But, there's usually an arc to the stories where you hear people who go on a big psychedelic trip, they face their demons, it sucks, they feel awful, and then there's the other arc where they come out rejuvenated and life makes sense. And mine was just pure, unadulterated terror for 6-7 hours and just nothing but the worst of the worst feelings ever, and then it was over. And I was like, hey, what happened to the other side of the arc? I was supposed to. So I was like,
it sounds like you were just like stuck in that like dark night of the soul territory.
Yeah, atrocious. Like I was absolutely sure I would never see anybody again. I was gonna die right then, and it was bad. I blacked out for a good chunk of the time. It was, even when I came back, people are like, oh, if you're having a bad mushroom trip, you can go for a walk in nature. I'm like, what, go for a walk? I couldn't even stand. I was like crawling on the floor.
I've been there. I've for sure been there before.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is never going to end either. It's like, I'm going to be stuck like this and it sucks.
So we're at the like mild, smoking weed, pleasant, enjoyable, whatever. Like anything that goes through my stomach rarely tends to have a good impact. Whether it's edibles or whether it's heavier stuff, unless it's in really small amounts, tends to mess me up.
That's a really good insight.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like smoking, no problem. I'm perfectly happy. Stomach, mess me up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know a lot of people like that. Like they'll take an edible and it's just might as well just cash it in right there.
Yeah. Yeah, edibles are funny that way. I've done it almost scientifically where I would go like, because I'm like, what's the right spot for me? And I would go like X number of milligrams, I feel nothing. Add 1 milligram another day, nothing. Add 1 milligram another day, nothing. Add one more, I feel like somebody hit me across the head with the baseball. I was like, there's no sweet spot here. Is either I feel nothing or I'm on the floor. What's going on here?
There's no comfort zone to be found.
No, none whatsoever. And that's different body chemistry. Different people react. Some people have an absolute blast. They are happy. They find a good spot. Good for them. It's just
right.
for me.
Yeah, I don't do any of that stuff anymore. But back when I did, yeah, I've definitely been on the wrong side of the sweet spot before.
Yeah.
Like at times I would just prefer it do nothing than to do what it did.
Yeah.
Well, hey man, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. It's been really fun. So where can people find you at?
So I guess those podcasts. So History on Fire. Anywhere where you listen. Both the Drunken Taoist and History on Fire, they are anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can check them out. There's a ton of content out there. So skim through the episode, pick something that seems more to your taste than not, and check it out. See if it works.
Cool. You'll have to let me know when the YouTube channel gets up and running.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm gonna try to make it happen in the next, hopefully, couple of months.
That'd be awesome. I would definitely check that out. It'd be super fun. Thank you, Daniele. I really appreciate it. Thanks again to Daniele Bolelli for being on the podcast. And don't forget to check out both the Drunken Taoist and History on Fire. If you've liked this episode, or if you've liked any of the episodes, really, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And tell a friend. I mean, why not, right? Anyway, as usual, this is Dharma Junkie. I'm Justin. Namaste.
I